I got fired for a HIPAA violation I didn't commit, then exposed my ex-boss's illegal activities, sparking a federal investigation. I am not typically someone who seeks revenge. I experience significant anxiety and bipolar disorder, which means that conflict usually results in panic attacks and intense depression. Generally, I prefer to brush it off and steer clear of similar situations in the future. However, there is one thing I will always confront: betrayal. This is the narrative of how I dismantled my former employer's business after she betrayed my trust. I had been employed at a small, privately owned medical facility in a town close to my home. Initially, I was brought on to address patients' daily needs, such as cooking and cleaning, but I soon advanced myself as various openings arose, taking on any task my supervisor asked of me. At one point, I even served as the medical billing manager despite having no experience in that area until her daughter was released from prison, at which time I was reassigned to data entry. I did not mind the data entry position. I am adept with numbers and organizational tasks, type quickly, and possess good computer skills. Unfortunately, none of these roles included any benefits. I was never offered a promotion for the additional responsibilities I had taken on, nor did I receive any extra incentives. The only raise I ever received was a modest increase of 50 cents after my first 6 months, which occurred during my nearly 2-year tenure. The structure of the company is worth mentioning. The owner had established the business a little over 3 years prior to my arrival, with no previous experience in managing any type of organization. Her sister was experienced, but the owner believed she needed to spread her wings, and that this was part of a divine plan. Hiring practices were also questionable, as she employed various family members including her ex-husband and prioritized them for every opportunity. She also had several foster children whom she placed in managerial roles, regardless of their lack of experience or qualifications. Some of the so-called managers were fresh from prison on drug charges or were on probation for various offenses. I began working there to improve my own situation, oddly enough. After being unemployed for several years, my anxiety and depression made social interactions incredibly challenging. I viewed this job as an opportunity to rebuild my life and forge a future with my wonderful wife. I had accumulated a significant amount of debt as a result of past poor decisions, spurred on by an indifference towards my future well-being due to my depression. I poured my energy into making this workplace better, and when the betrayal occurred, it devastated me, as I had been vulnerable and trusting. Due to its small size and the owner's unfamiliarity with managing a medical facility, this company faced many issues, such as delayed billing, unsecured computer networks, and unaddressed patient complaints, among others. As I became more integrated into the facility, I noticed an array of problems that needed immediate attention for both organizational and security purposes, including 2 major violations of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that required urgent corrective action. That Friday, I completed my routine data maintenance tasks and then approached the office manager who was not related to the owner to check if she needed assistance. The owner was in the office with her, which was unusual, as she typically occupied herself with tasks outside the office, though it wasn't unheard of. When I arrived that morning, my computer had malfunctioned, which was common since the information technology support came from her current husband who, while not a bad person, was certainly questionable in this scenario. I greeted her warmly and inquired about networking issues, to which she confirmed there were indeed problems, so I returned to the workroom to tackle some lower priority tasks. 15 minutes later, the owner entered the room with the general manager and requested to speak with me privately. This did not raise any alarms for me, as she had previously done so when reassigning my roles, so I assumed a similar change was forthcoming. When she entered, she retrieved one of the company iPads. These iPads were utilized during the intake process for capturing client photographs and incorporating them into the electronic health record system used by counselors and floor staff. I had been thrust into managing the intake after the original administrator handling it was dismissed. Lacking familiarity with Apple products, I followed her instructions precisely to upload the images to our system. She asked me to come around to show me something. She displayed the screen, revealing that the iPad was registered under a name completely unrelated to the facility. I later discovered who it belonged to, but that is a detail for another time. This is unacceptable. This is a violation of the HIPAA regulations, and we could face serious repercussions for this, she said. This was a company iPad, complete with the splash screen. I had no reason to believe it wasn't secured in any way. Additionally, the responsibility for this was not mine, particularly as I was merely following the owner's directive. I felt it was not my concern in any regard, as I was not the only one who had utilized that device in precisely the same manner. I prefer to address problems proactively rather than dwell on them, especially when timing is critical to prevent violations and fines. I asked, "All right, how can we rectify this? I am willing to assist." She looked me straight in the eyes and replied, "We address this by terminating your employment." I stood there in disbelief, looking at her in confusion, hoping and praying that I had somehow misheard her. I asked, "You are firing me," she affirmed, and I could have sworn a brief smirk crossed her face as she spoke. I then turned to the general manager, who was in tears though she made an effort to conceal it. I asked her why I was being terminated for something outside of my control, especially when it was something the owner had explicitly instructed me to do, but she merely fell silent and told me I had to leave. I had been friends with everyone else in the office, excluding the owner's children, so I bid them farewell, hugged them, and cried while the owner stood over my shoulder ushering me out, still wearing a near smirk. That moment confirmed to me that this would not end well for her. First, the fallout she created for herself. I had been on friendly terms with almost all the staff, including the counselors. One of them had been considering resigning for quite some time, and I had repeatedly encouraged him to remain or to attempt to persevere through, insisting that things might improve next week. I was terminated on Friday, and later learned from another former employee that he had tendered his resignation the following Monday. While I cannot say for certain he left because of my dismissal, the timing certainly seems too coincidental. Following his departure, another counselor followed suit, then 2 more left. In the end, the owner was left with merely 2 counselors responsible for both residential and day treatment, one of whom had just returned from maternity leave. I genuinely feel for her. I hope she opted to depart, as she was a fantastic colleague, and another who had been focusing solely on day treatment and not the more demanding residential treatment. I like to think that she set off a domino effect, but I cannot confirm with certainty. Now, turning to my actions. Given my extensive experience in nearly every role within the company, I had a thorough understanding of its inner workings. I knew precisely how much money they were still trying to recover from insurance, was aware of many of the technical troubles, and, most crucially, the violations occurring. Upon taking the data entry job, numerous security issues became apparent, which I promptly brought to her attention for immediate resolution. From a technical perspective, the electronic health records system lacked clearance levels for patients, meaning everyone including maintenance workers could access patient counselors and vitals notes. The electronic health records system was also highly susceptible to security breaches, as it could be logged into from any computer, including personal home computers. I raised both of these concerns, along with various minor state statute violations that required rectification, such as employees being unable to obtain proper copies of DHS statutes or employee manuals. From a procedural standpoint, intakes were originally managed in the file room, where client files were haphazardly scattered across cardboard boxes, with name tabs visible to anyone. If more than a couple of intakes occurred, they were conducted in the cafeteria, forcing individuals to fill out paperwork amid an environment where others were both arriving and departing. Billing was situated adjacent to the day treatment area, with the door often left open and patient names being discussed audibly. The walls were also extremely thin, allowing anyone in the day treatment room to overhear client names mentioned during treatment sessions. Food and water temperature logs were frequently neglected. Organizationally, it was chaotic, something I was actively attempting to restore, as there were 4 years' worth of disorganized client files to sort through and scan. The most incriminating revelation discovered involved the owner and her daughter engaging in upcharging clients' insurance. I can't completely confirm the owner's drug use, but I did witness the daughter using a prescription bottle of Suboxone that did not belong to her. The daughter had previously faced allegations from a former colleague who unceremoniously exited the company. Upon returning home, I was still in shock and spent time at my computer sobbing. I had sacrificed everything for this establishment, dedicated countless hours. While overtime was compensated, employees were reprimanded for exceeding their hours. I frequently went overdue to additional tasks and made significant sacrifices for my mental health take steps towards improvement. That sorrow gradually morphed into anger. Although I typically possess a remarkably long fuse, when I do get angry, the rage is intense. Thus, I set my plan into motion. After applying for unemployment benefits, I commenced making phone calls. I reached out to the Department of Health Services to file a complaint against the facility citing all the privacy violations I had witnessed. I received the typical response of, "All right, we will reach out if anything changes or if we require further details." Once our conversation concluded, I called various insurance providers, including Blue Cross Blue Shield, Network Health, United Healthcare, and Prairie States. I provided them with the tax ID and NPI of the facility, information I had obtained during my time as the billing manager, and requested they review their contracts from the time the services were provided, as well as the billing for those services. After all of this, I sat in a state of numbness. A few weeks went by, and I checked in on my unemployment status to ensure my payments were processed, only to discover that there was a hold on my account indicating my employer had classified my termination as negligent and misconduct on my part. I received a call from the unemployment office asking several questions, ultimately determining I was not at fault on the surface and would still receive my benefits. A sigh of relief washed over me. I believed that was the conclusion of the ordeal and that I could begin to move forward. However, I received a letter indicating my former employer was appealing the decision. The letter noted that if the judge determined I was indeed at fault, not only would my benefits be ceased, but my wages could also be garnished after securing future employment to repay any benefits I had received. After experiencing a few panic attacks, I dove into reading everything related. I meticulously scrutinized statutes and reviewed all the evidence my former employer submitted, making notations on my computer regarding inconsistencies and inaccuracies in her statements. 4 pages later, I began reaching out to former coworkers who had left the company. I contacted the individual I had mentioned earlier, the one who had fled without notice, and inquired if she would be willing to testify. She initially agreed, but ultimately declined since she was also involved in an investigation concerning the organization. That situation involved another counselor's specialization. She was the sole qualified individual to provide a specific service. Upon her departure, she was replaced by another counselor in training who required supervision from a qualified medical director. However, the owner did not possess that qualification, but had still been advertising, providing, and billing for that service throughout the process. I hope that wasn't too convoluted. Returning to my narrative, I hadn't spoken to her for a while, so we caught up and I shared what transpired. She expressed disbelief, asserting that everything happening was complete nonsense, and confirmed that she and several others had employed the same procedures. I also inquired if she was familiar with the name associated with the iPad. She requested the name again and asked if I was absolutely sure it was correct. I affirmed it, prompting her to respond. "That's an ex-client. This coworker had been there since the beginning, so I had no reason to doubt her. The owner must have either purchased or stolen the iPad from an ex-client, failed to erase it, and then issued it to the staff for transmitting confidential health information to the company servers." I immediately contacted the Department of Health Services again to amend my initial complaint to incorporate this new information. On the day of the appeal, I was shaking and on the verge of panic when the call came through. It took immense self-control to refrain from yelling at the owner upon hearing her displeasing voice. Sitting there with all my notes, the DHS manual, and relevant statutes, I was prepared with substantial evidence. This is where the owner began making numerous mistakes. I later learned her daughter was defending the company during the hearing while the owner was elsewhere in court addressing another lawsuit, in addition to 2 investigations and this hearing. Apparently, she had not prepared at all. There were no notes, no evidence, nothing. She falsely assumed she would successfully defend herself through sheer confidence. The judge began questioning her daughter, who then relayed that the owner was driving her to the courthouse while coaching her responses. The judge had to instruct her multiple times to refrain from providing answers to her daughter's questions, as she was not listed as a witness and was not entitled to defend the company. Despite her never actually stopping her interruptions, an eventuality resulting in her departure roughly 15 minutes in, leaving her daughter to fend for herself. In my state, appealing requires the appellant to supply a case or burden of proof. Neither the owner nor her daughter seemed to understand this, as they evidently lacked a viable case. The judge inquired about the events surrounding my termination, leading to multiple lies from the owner to the extent that the judge found her answers inconsistent, reminding her of her oath and stating that lying under oath could result in perjury charges. The absolute tipping point arrived when I began posing my questions. Me, was I the only person using the device? Daughter, I don't know. Me, but you were aware enough to terminate my employment over it. Daughter, Me, regarding the device, was it purchased as new or used? Daughter, it was new. Me, how was it that the device was registered to another individual? Daughter, Me, and do you know who that person was? Daughter, no. Me, an ex-client. We continued down this line of questioning, and the judge eventually interjected. Judge, what specific statute did he violate? Daughter, he violated HIPAA. Judge, can you provide me with a specific state statute? Daughter, no, but perhaps I could consult my mother in half an hour. Judge, no, you have been allotted sufficient time to prepare a case. Once this call concludes, the hearing will finish. I sat there, a smile creeping across my face. I was confident I had won before the call even concluded. We were notified that a decision would be communicated within 5 to 7 days, or sooner should the judge reach a verdict more quickly. 2 days later, I received a letter confirming my victory. While this was certainly a positive outcome, the suggestion made by the owner's daughter inadvertently added further complications for the company. The situation surrounding the iPad was automatically forwarded to the Department of Health Services due to the potential HIPAA violation. About a week later, I received a call from a private investigator who took my statement regarding the iPad. I recounted my previous complaint and shared the ongoing issues. I received yet another. We will reach out if we have further questions, correspondence, believing that to be the end of it. However, I soon received another letter. As I glanced at the letterhead, I instantly assumed it was from my State Department of Health Services and felt a surge of panic, thinking they had somehow found a way to appeal the decision. Upon opening it, I discovered it originated from federal authorities. A wave of dread washed over me upon reading that my complaint had been investigated and escalated due to the findings. And that brings us to the present. The owner has recently claimed to have fallen seriously ill and has ceased attending work altogether, according to several remaining coworkers who still communicate with me. Additionally, it appears she has not fared well in her other legal troubles, facing potential prison time for insurance fraud, while her daughter may also be facing repercussions for violating probation due to drug use. I discussed this with my former coworker, who indicated that many other employees have left in light of the unfolding issues, with most expressing a desire to avoid any potential consequences from their association with the organization, given that many of them have criminal backgrounds. In summary, I was terminated and reported numerous violations committed by my previous employer, leading to investigations by both state and federal agencies. Story 2. I fractured my arm, discovered my boyfriend was cheating on me with my best friend, then slept with his sister who exposed him. This narrative has gained some recognition within my group of friends, and one person has finally convinced me to share it here. This one's for you, Evan. This is the account of my experience with a wonderful girl named Charlie. Part 1 background. This occurred approximately 2 years ago, towards the end of my senior year in high school. It was early May, and our graduation was scheduled for early June. With most of our minds shifting to summer and our teachers no longer caring, my friends and I joined the majority of our classmates in skipping school. Our friend group included a few minor characters in addition to my boyfriend of 3 years, Kyle, my best friend since middle school, Sarah, myself, and a recent addition, Brad, who was, to be honest, a bit of a white knight. Kyle came from a Christian family. Not the kind that is genuinely charitable, but rather the homophobic, derogatory type that would kick a homeless person and then sit in church acting pious. They attended church every Wednesday and Friday, and although they invited me, I never went because I was a agnostic, b, a closeted bisexual, and c, nearly physically ill from their hypocrisy. They never really approved of me because of this. They also had a sense of entitlement that became apparent when they got into sticky situations. They helped manage the church's finances, grants, donations, upkeep, etc., which placed them high in the social hierarchy. The church, while not the focal point of our neighborhood, still had many major local figures as its supporters. It was the sort of unofficial establishment that embedded itself into politics without being overtly involved. So, whenever they faced legal issues, they would drop names and evade consequences. Kyle himself was decent enough. I had known him since elementary school. He was generally kind and attractive, shallow, I know, but it was high school, so I put up with his foolish and often self-absorbed behavior. His family treated him like he was a divine gift. But his sister, Charlie, was the one who made the entire family redeemable. She was a year younger than Kyle and me, and the only genuinely Christian person among us. However, she also had a mischievous side that often led to enjoyable escapades. You could always tell she had a naughty idea brewing by the little half-smile she would wear. We often spent time together, and she was incredibly fun to be around. We were very close, and she confided in me about issues she couldn't discuss with her family. To me, she was a fantastic friend. To them, she was the ideal Christian daughter. Sarah was an excellent friend who supported me through my mother's death. I wasn't diagnosed with depression or anything serious, but I loved my mom deeply, and losing her devastated me. Both she and Kyle stood by me, and Sarah was the one who encouraged me to ask him out. I trusted her as much as any teenager possibly could. Anyway, back to the story. One fateful Tuesday, Kyle, Sarah, a few other friends, and I ventured downtown to grab some food, skate, and just generally engage in typical, annoying teenage antics. Growing bored with what we were doing, I suggested to Kyle that we race on our skateboards to the end of the street. It was just after lunch, so most people were either back in their offices or stuck in traffic. He agreed, and about 30 seconds later, after hit a loose flagstone, I ended up slamming my face into the pavement and fracturing my arm. I tried to downplay it, but no one else was having it, especially as I was walking like a newborn deer, and my arm was starting to swell. We ended up visiting the emergency room, where they confirmed that I had indeed fractured my arm and also had a concussion. The concussion was my consequence. It wasn't a serious incident by any means, but due to my condition, they wanted me to stay a bit longer for additional tests, to stabilize my arm, and to ensure I was healthy enough to resume my regular foolishness. Thankfully, Kyle and Sarah chose to stay with me, as their parents seemed indifferent, and skipping school the following day was not a concern. I ended up spending the night in the hospital, which had been understaffed for years, so once your condition was deemed stable, they typically left you in limbo and returned home the next day with the usual concussion instructions. Essentially, I had to become a couch potato for 10 days. Eager to regain my newfound freedom, I complied, opting to spend about 7 days sleeping and eating. I only picked up my phone after getting medical clearance, only to find an unexpected message waiting for me. Part 2, the incident Brad had gotten my phone number from Kyle and sent me a link to a private data storage account, one of those services where you can upload videos, images, etc., and secure it with a password for personal use, along with a password. Intrigued by this abrupt plot twist in my otherwise dull life, I followed the link to discover literal gigabytes of images depicting Kyle and Sarah in compromising scenarios, with captions suggesting they were not at all favorable for their relationship with the Lord. I mean everything from individual nude photographs taken from the Snapchat app to explicit images and everything in between. It resembled an amateur adult film collection. The most recent file was dated to, as you might expect, that Tuesday evening. Brad explained that Kyle had this whole system where he would share videos of him and Sarah's intimate encounters with a close circle for their entertainment. I personally would have simply used an adult website like a reasonably normal person, but Kyle had always been somewhat self-absorbed, so I wasn't surprised by this narcissistic behavior. Brad had somehow gotten included in this group and was disgusted by the entire situation. For a glimpse of context, throughout our 3-year relationship, the most physical thing Kyle and I had done was oral sex following a football game that past January. He spewed nonsense about saving himself for marriage while engaging intimately with my best friend. I was devastated. The two individuals I had entrusted completely had, unbeknownst to me, been systematically eroding that trust, fully aware of how important they were to my life. I confronted Kyle about this during our next hangout at his house, and initially, he denied everything. He claimed I was being overly paranoid. When I presented the evidence, he roped in his parents, who claimed I had manipulated the images and videos and threatened to report me for producing child pornography. Sarah and Kyle had only recently turned 18 the previous September. Knowing the police would corroborate my account, but not wanting to jeopardize Brad for possession, our city had been cracking down on such matters for years. I dropped the issue and left. I thought we had broken up, but to my surprise, his parents insisted we maintain our relationship until after graduation to preserve appearances with their extended family. They seemed to know he was guilty deep down, but their usual entitlement kicked in. Not wanting to create waves yet, I reluctantly complied and began to spiral back into my earlier negative mental state. Part 3, the retaliation. The intriguing thing about religious families is that they are just as capable of raising LGBTQ children as those who are not religious. Kyle had avoided this affliction. Charlie had not. Not even a week after our argument, I was at Kyle's home, helping him maintain the facade. We hardly interacted, so I turned to Charlie for companionship. This often happened after fights with Kyle, as Charlie's easygoing nature and deep concern typically led me to confide in her about things I didn't even share with Sarah. This occasion, being the biggest argument of our relationship, was no exception. While we lounged in her room, I noticed she was becoming increasingly anxious. Her usual buoyant personality had vanished. Contrary to popular belief, I didn't possess strong gaydar, so I assumed she had learned of Kyle's betrayal. Well, yes, but not exactly. I inquired about her distress, and she revealed that she had a secret to share. I wasn't particularly in the mood for drama or providing comfort, but since it was Charlie, I allowed her to continue. In what was, yet to this day, one of the largest surprises of my life, she disclosed how she had been in the closet for years. She began realizing her feelings around 14 or 15, and for quite some time, she had been attempting to get closer to me because I was the only person with whom she genuinely felt at ease. Her family was almost comically homophobic and primarily approved of her church friends. She felt envy towards Kyle and our relationship, but believing I was straight and not wanting to create problems, she had resigned herself to her angsty teenage longing. That all shifted when the HMS relationship struck an infidelity iceberg, and she felt she could finally take her chance. Now, under any other circumstances, I would have outright refused. We had known one another for more than a decade, and I had been dating her brother for 3 years. It would have felt wrong, and Charlie had practically become a sister to me by that time. But then, adrenaline coursed through me, and the urge for revenge intensified. For her privacy, I won't share the details, but one thing led to another, and before long, we were basking in the post-encounter glow when I began to feel uneasy. I felt guilty. I knew what I had done was wrong, but in light of my current circumstances, I genuinely couldn't bring myself to care. More than anything, I felt sorry for Charlie. At that moment, my emotions were ambiguous and painful, and I thought I didn't genuinely have feelings for her in that way, thus assuming I would leave the only non-family person I still trusted as a one-time affair. She picked up on my vibe and helped me steer away from some dark thoughts while we got dressed and exchanged farewells. We ended up continuing our relationship afterward. For her, it was the opportunity to be with her long-standing crush, and for me, it presented an escape. Following graduation, we maintained the facade until both our families, along with their church friends, arrived at their home for a grand dinner celebration and a commemorative slideshow. I had been aware of this event since the fall, yet had not thought too deeply about it until the recent events transpired. During our brief affair, Charlie had been helping me out of my funk and prompting thoughts of retribution. Apparently, her parents had been spreading rumors among their church friends that I had cheated on Kyle, claiming that after the dinner he planned to break up with me, in front of a gathering that included my family. I couldn't care less about myself, but my father had received considerable scrutiny for remarrying after my mother's passing. Some of that pressure even came from me, but with age and perspective, I had let it go. I was not going to let him be publicly embarrassed by some people who believed they were superior. Initially, it had felt like mere petty high school drama, but this was serious. My dad worked for the district representative's office. The district representative had grown up in that church. It was part of his public persona of being one of the people. A few well-chosen words could ruin my dad's career. I guess Kyle's parents, in their malice, hadn't considered that part. Or perhaps they had, and I'm giving them too much credit. Regardless, this had now turned personal. So, Charlie, embracing her mischievous spirit, hatched a plan. She was well liked by the church community, which made it easy for her to take charge of preparing the slideshow. She even gave a speech about how she was excited to finally recognize her brother and his friends for their achievements. She then proceeded to compile the videos and photographs from the shared account Kyle had created in his foolishness. He hadn't changed the password, along with screenshots of their discussions in a group chat. She obtained those by borrowing his phone, making a call, and sending the screenshots to her phone before erasing them from the message history. She incorporated this material into the slideshow. The structure was such that a slide displayed various images of the boys in question alongside their favorite Bible quote. The following few slides then included the conversations they had, along with whatever images they had marked as their favorites, censored and only utilizing my adult frames for clear reasons. Overall, it took Charlie several days to create this slideshow, but at no point did she complain or ask for a respite. She was on a mission, and while it was somewhat odd in its excitement, it also shifted my perspective on our relationship. The event day arrived, and we all gathered around the table, engaging in small talk and forcing our most genuine smiles. Several church families directed self-satisfied, "You're about to face the consequences," glances at me, but I ignored them and mainly stuck close to my family throughout the evening. Charlie and I deliberately kept our distance to prevent raising suspicions. Finally, the pivotal moment arrived. Everyone was summoned to the backyard, where rows of chairs had been set up in front of a large projector. Charlie put on her best innocent little sister act before initiating the soundtrack. The slides began rolling, causing gasps and shouts from the audience, synchronized with the song "Good Old Days" by Macklemore. Watching the shock on Kyle and his family's faces as they grasped what was unfolding was unforgettable. Each boy was brought onto the screen and exposed, and every time, the audience was too preoccupied recovering from the reveal to stop it. The few who attempted to intervene were rebuffed when Charlie quickly snatched up her laptop and dashed into the house, locking herself in a bathroom. The projector was wireless. No one thought to turn off the projector. Idiots. Eventually, after nearly 5 minutes of Bible verses and scandalous images, the focus landed on the star of the evening. His quote, Hebrews 13:4, "Give honor to marriage, and remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery." This was meant to set the stage for my public embarrassment. Oh, how the tables had turned. A series of videos showcasing his adult encounters played, paired with screenshots of the extensive content he had created, including texts dating back to the summer of 2017 that hinted at the duration of his infidelity. It was difficult to watch, but I found comfort in the sweet nectar of vengeance laid before me. Finally came the last slide, a blank white page containing a singular audio file link. I was baffled by this part, as I hadn't anticipated audio being included in our plans. Charlie tiptoed back outside and hit play, and the voices of Kyle's parents exploded through the speakers. Apparently, Charlie had recorded their entire scheme detailing my intended humiliation and had incorporated it into the slideshow as evidence of my impending setup. She had covered all bases, and as the presentation concluded, she stood next to the projector, radiating that mischievous half-smile. A few moments passed before anything transpired. Kyle and his family hurriedly retreated into the house, but since the party was being hosted at their home, they had nowhere to escape. Various church members expressed their disapproval toward Charlie, Kyle, and the boys present, and she maintained her composure, calling out for her parents and awaiting their appearance. Once they appeared, she swiftly planted a huge kiss on my cheek and declared herself as gay. Unsurprisingly, this did not go over well. My parents and I departed in haste, and Charlie, now in deep trouble, came along with us. Part for the aftermath. Charlie and I have been a couple since then. As you can probably guess, her family severed ties with her, leading her to stay with me. My stepmother was not particularly thrilled about how she executed my revenge, but my dad found it amusing. He collected the $20 from my stepmom. They had a bet regarding when I would come out, apparently, and advocated for Charlie's right to stay. After all, they had a rather memorable first impression, and there was no risk of pregnancy. Moreover, it presented the perfect opportunity for my parents to take a stand against Kyle's family after they tarnished my reputation and tried to alienate me. My dad endured some teasing and sarcastic comments at work for a few weeks, but considering the dynamics and the fact I was a teenage daughter, allegedly prone to rebellious phases, he managed to navigate it without severe consequences. As for Kyle, well, his family was banned from their church after his actions came to light, causing them to lose their status within the community. They lost their influence with local officials, and the various name drops they had relied upon to evade fines and penalties finally caught up to them. The last I heard from Sarah indicated that they had relocated to a neighboring state, and Kyle was living a sexless existence in his parents' basement, barely getting by at a community college. Sarah and I eventually reconciled. It took a considerable amount of apologizing on her part and some humility, but not wanting to hold on to resentment, I allowed her to return to my life. We're not as close as we once were, but that trust is gradually being restored. Let's hope she manages to keep her life in order this time. Charlie and I cohabited until I left for college, where we have been maintaining a long-distance relationship ever since. She successfully enrolled in a school 2 hours away, which allows us to frequently visit one another on weekends, indulging in our typical debauchery. It has taken me time to heal fully. Even though the vengeance was cathartic, it provided little true solace. Despite the implications of this story, I had a meaningful connection with Kyle, and while it's easy to dismiss it as teenage melodrama, the experience still left scars. My family and Charlie have aided me in rebuilding my life. Our relationship may have started in an unconventional manner and could easily be described as trashy, but we remain unconcerned about judgment. We are happy, and I have a girl who has gone above and beyond for me. Not everyone can say that. Summary: my boyfriend of 3 years was unfaithful with my best friend, and his religious family attempted to cover it up. I ended up being intimate with his sister, who exposed him during a church dinner and brought me out of the closet alongside her. Story 3. I will never learn that nothing is so permanent as a temporary solution, but my boss has. About 15 years ago, I received a stack of green bar paper delivered to my desk each morning. It typically varied from about 60 pages to 600. I had to examine each page and search for specific information, which may not have always been available, and then compile it into a list. After that, I would categorize the list by client, format it neatly, and send the findings to each client. This process took anywhere from 1 hour to half a day. I eventually succeeded in persuading our management to send me an electronic copy securely through email. I could then analyze and nearly fully format it using Excel. I could typically complete the resulting data in approximately 15 to 30 minutes at most. The method was relatively basic, but it accomplished the task efficiently. Additionally, it was easy for me to adjust if the format of the underlying data changed. I anticipated that someone would develop something more sophisticated and official within the next 18 months or so. However, that simple sheet was what we relied on for years, even some years after I departed the team and had forgotten all about it. A member of the team discovered my name on the sheet and contacted me for assistance. About 5 years ago, I was requested to create a report that would identify gaps in our on-call schedule. Similar to before, I constructed a quick and basic mechanism using some reports and Excel to identify the gaps. As before, It was basic but easy to understand and modify as necessary. Once again, I assumed someone would come along afterward and develop something more robust and official. However, that never occurred. I utilized that process for years, right up until I left. In fact, I recently conversed on LinkedIn with the individual who assumed part of my responsibilities. They are still using that tool. I transitioned to a new company where there was a need to reconcile some expense accounts with certain operational activities. Essentially, we needed a method to verify whether we were spending appropriately on certain items. We had purchased a solution that was supposed to address this issue, but due to some idiosyncrasies in our industry and peculiarities in our company, it was accurate only about half of the time. Thus, it effectively proved useless. Once more, I devised a solution, and again it was basic, yet it accomplished the task. Unfortunately, this time my solution required a significant amount of manual work, but the result was accurate. It takes me approximately 30 minutes each day, assuming the structure of the incoming data remains constant. This time, I clearly stated that this process was merely a proof of concept. Its manual nature made it unsuitable as a permanent solution. We have an entire reporting and analytics department that should be capable of developing something significantly more effective. In the meantime, I would use what I created to illustrate what was feasible. However, once again, it has now been almost 2 years since I first presented this tool. Not only are we still using it, but it has officially been deemed as meeting the need and a good use of resources, etc. In fact, the reporting and analytics department recently declared that implementing a more automated solution is not a prudent use of development hours. Therefore, it appears I will be responsible for this for the foreseeable future. My manager asked me during my last review if I had created documentation for the process, so we can train someone else to take over when I take 2 weeks of paid time off this summer. One of the inputs for the aforementioned process relies on a vendor that we have determined is excessively overpriced. Once again, I developed a proof of concept substitute that utilized common tools within our company and expertise we already possess. We could save approximately $150,000 annually in exchange for someone dedicating about 2 hours each week to this task. I was able to replicate the process of our vendor almost precisely. Thus, the outcome would appear quite similar. I could even enhance the reports if individuals were interested. At this time, my manager announced its availability for use. The department that collaborates with the relevant vendor can use this alternative. I would estimate the chances of its adoption to be about 50-50. My superiors were excited about the potential savings, but their enthusiasm diminished once they realized my team would not be responsible for the actual work. Finally, my boss approached me last month and provided clear instructions to run any of these small projects by her first before announcing them to the public. She is supportive of my creating these tools, but she wants to ensure that my team does not get burdened with managing them. She stated that we want to be the create solutions team, not the do the work other people ignore team. I hope everyone who has a day to relax enjoys it. I just finished mowing the lawn and trimming the hedges. Now it's time to clean and mop.